Are you ready to change the way you see your life? It starts with asking the right questions about your past. In the new audiobook, What Happened to You, Oprah Winfrey and trauma expert Dr. Bruce Perry share deeply personal conversations that emphasize the question, what happened to you, rather than what's wrong with you. Buy the audiobook, What Happened to You, read by the authors, now wherever audiobooks are sold.
This is Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
I'm the only lawyer ever to obtain a court ruling that a president of the United States committed a crime.
For truth. For competition.
As a young lawyer, I helped break up AT&T. That's why you have all your cell phones today.
For sovereignty. For the Republic.
I'm the guy who at Judicial Watch, which I founded, uncovered the Chinagate scandal. Millions of dollars going to the Clinton campaign, corrupting our political system.
For the privacy of citizens.
And I'm the only guy to have enjoined the National Security Agency from mass surveillance on hundreds of millions of Americans.
Tearing it up.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
Bringing it back.
We're going to take this country apart and put it back together again in the way envisioned by our founding fathers.
It's not just talk.
We're not just regurgitating news stories. Larry Klayman, special prosecutor, is making the news.
And now, here's Larry.
Welcome to this week's edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. We have a very special guest, Armstrong Williams, a very prominent African-American conservative who is not afraid to stick his neck out and tell the truth. In fact, most black conservatives have the courage. It's the whites and others who are running for the exit these days. I might say exit stage left. And talk about stage left. We saw the brain-dead President Joe Biden and his speech, the equivalent of the State of the Nation, last Wednesday. They must have jacked him up on steroids because he actually was fairly lucid for an hour. And that's what's really scary, is that being lucid, he gave his plan to turn this country into a socialist, communist, atheist state. Total government control, $4 trillion. He was spewing this stuff forth, handing out goodies like candy to people. The American people, by and large, I think, like candy. They want things for free, particularly the youth in this country. And probably politically, it was very good for him, but it's very dangerous. Communism sounded really good at the start when Karl Marx came out with his Communist Manifesto. And then we know what happened. Turned into dictatorships, turned into equivalent of Holocaust, pogroms in Russia. People were eliminated. All opposition was destroyed. And we had the Soviet Union then for many, many decades before it collapsed under its own weight. Well, when this happens in this country, and it's happening right now, it won't take decades from 1917 to collapse. The country's already collapsed. It's collapsed. And on top of it, with all the damage that was done by the communist Chinese, and of course, Biden didn't talk about getting damages for that, damages to our economy, damages to our health, damages to our emotional well-being. It had to be Freedom Watch that brought class actions for that in Dallas, Texas, and Jerusalem, Israel. And we also filed a criminal complaint in The Hague, Holland. Of course, we haven't heard from that. The Europeans, frankly, are afraid of their shadow by and large, and they're in control of the International Criminal Court by and large, them and people from other third world countries. But now that we have this plan and it's out there on the table, the Democrats, which has become the party of the devil, literally the party of the devil. But then there's the Republican Party, which is compromised, corrupt, and frankly dead. And you saw them just sitting there on their hands, not knowing what to do, most of them falling asleep because they're just thinking about how much more money they can rake in with their fundraising, claiming that they're opposing the Democrats. Well, they're not doing anything other than talk on Fox News. That's the bottom line. We have a situation here where the left now, through the Biden-Harris Justice Department, through the District of Columbia Bar, the New York Bar, not all bars are bad bars. I'm talking about the bars that regulate lawyers, are trying to destroy anyone that might oppose them, even in the courts. And that's what's ironic, because the courts are so compromised and corrupt, particularly at the federal level, as I wrote about in my book. It takes a revolution, forget the scandal industry, that it's not even a check anymore. And we're going to talk about what is a check later, our citizens' grand juries, our Third Continental Congress. I am forming a new political party separate from Freedom Watch called the New American Independence Party, because the Republican Party does not represent conservatives, people of faith, and those who believe in the vision of our founding fathers. It represents itself. It's simply a fraudulent money-making scheme, continuing to rake in money to enhance the people that run it at the expense of the American people. And we've seen that, because we wouldn't be in the situation we were today if the Republicans had made good on virtually any promise, whether it was reforming Obamacare or balancing the budget. Remember, $28 billion occurred in large part during Republican administrations, including the Trump administration. So this is where we are today. And we see this push to eliminate any opposition, not just with regard to big tech and the social media, not just with regard to sports leagues, not just with regard to labor unions and corporations, which are siding with these leftists because they believe that the leftists will return the favor and enhance their profitability and their power. But we also see it with regard to what's going on with what has become the Biden-Harris Justice Department, otherwise known as the New American Gestapo. Already, over 600 people have been rounded up that were in Washington on January 6th, threatened to turn over their cell phones, threatened that if they don't, they'll get a warrant, and many of them indicted, hundreds indicted, for standing up for freedom, for liberty. Most of the people in Washington, D.C. on January 6th were ordinary people like you and me who had it with the rank corruption in government. They saw it with regard to the judiciary, who would not even give President Trump a hearing on election fraud. They saw it with regard to Congress that ran around like the Keystone Cops, crazy Keystone Cops with impeachment proceedings, doing nothing. They saw it with Republicans who promised investigations and prosecutions when Trump controlled the White House. Nothing, nada, zilch, as I predicted. And they saw it with the deep state in the executive branch, which did everything they could to cut the legs out from President Trump and others, conservatives, people of faith, and others. They saw it with attorney generals of Trump, whether it was Jeff Sessions or Bill Barr. But on top of that, now we see how this Gestapo, other than indicting people that were there in support of the president and support of this country on January 6th, we see federal judges making statements such as Amy Berman Jackson and Emmett Sullivan of Mike Flynn fame, or infame, should we say, in effect threatening people that will challenge this government. There were hearings with regard to some of the people that were indicted with regard to the January 6th riots, and these judges made statements inferring that people like Larry Klayman, people like you, people out there in the hinterland that are fed up with this government, and even those that were there peacefully, can be a threat to this country and are a threat to this country. And then the Biden-Harris Justice Department, the New American Gestapo, is also trying to destroy people like Rudy Giuliani, who supported the president. And here's the irony. Actually, it's not even an irony. It's an outrage. As you know, because I talk about this on our weekly radio shows and on my podcast, we've been undertaking citizens' grand juries, which we have the right to do. Freedom Watch is sponsoring them. You can see it every Thursday. We're now in our 6th session as of this Thursday on freedomwatchusa.org or crowdsourcethetruth.com. Jason Goodman is great technically, and he's publishing this on his website and on other websites, streaming it live. You can watch it in real time. We have been seeking the indictment, and we have got the indictment of Joseph Biden, Hunter Biden, and James Biden for massive bribery, monies that were laundered into their accounts, hundreds of millions of dollars from communist China, from Ukraine, and Russia, all laundered through Hunter Biden into the account. We have the testimony of Tony Bobolinsky, who for a while was going to be the business partner of Hunter Biden and others in and around him, including James Biden, who testified, in effect, on cable news. We have the video. We played it to the citizens' grand jury that Joe Biden was getting a 10% cut. That's what he was going to make. Now, you have to ask yourself this question. How is it that we have a so-called president, albeit elected fraudulently, who is now bought and paid for by the butchers of Beijing who brought us COVID-19? How is it that we have a so-called president, albeit elected fraudulently, who has taken this kind of money laundered through Ukraine and also Russia? Of course, remember the Russian witch hunts. The real Russian investigation should have been with regard to Joe Biden, his son Hunter, James Biden, and others in the Biden family. This is the twist here, is that they're going after now the Justice Department, our so-called Justice Department that I was once a proud alumnus of as a former prosecutor and defense lawyer in the antitrust division that helped break up AT&T. They're going after Rudy Giuliani. They raided his office. They raided his apartment last week at 6 a.m. without warning. Grabbed all of his cell phones, all of his hard drives, except the one hard drive they didn't take, apparently was the hard drive that contained the emails of Hunter Biden, which Giuliani had somehow obtained. Now, they're trying to destroy him because they want to make sure they get him out of the way. But what was this whole thing about? It was about him not registering as a foreign agent with regard to activities in the Ukraine. See the symmetry? Ukraine. Money's laundered to the Bidens through Ukraine. Let's get rid of Giuliani. And let's get rid of any conservative lawyer, whether it's Larry Klayman by the D.C. bar that has communists sitting on hearing committees concerning me, Michael Tiger, whether it's Kellyanne Conway, whether it's Bill Barr, who frankly they shouldn't worry about because he never did anything anyway. For all of the four previous bar presidents of the D.C. bars filed an ethics complaint against him, seeking to have him disbarred. They want to disbar Ted Cruz. They want to disbar Josh Hawley, who stood up for the president. And of course, they want to disbar Giuliani. New York bar is the same. Ultra-leftist bars run by officials who gave heavily to Clinton, Obama, and now Biden. Every aspect of society is now being used to eliminate conservative opposition. We're going to talk about that more in the next segment. I'll be right back. And we're going to talk about my plan, as I wrote in my book, It Takes a Revolution. Forget the scandal industry. Listen intently. And after the second segment, we're going to have Armstrong Williams. He's going to give his take. I'll be right back.
Fearless.
He's claiming he's crazy, he's racist, he's out to kill the Democrats.
Dangerous.
You don't care, he uses the court and the law.
Lethal.
This is bad.
Special prosecutor
Very bad.
Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
In addition to the Inquisition against conservatives, people of faith, in addition to trying to destroy freedom of speech, is the onslaught to destroy law enforcement. And we're fighting back. I started a new organization with Sheriff Joe Arpaio and my very brave African-American friend, client, and colleague, Demetric Penny, an African-American black cop from Dallas who sued Farrakhan, New Black Panthers Party, Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, all of them, for that massacre that occurred about 4 years ago, where 5 Dallas cops were killed, which was incited by Louis Farrakhan primarily. He called for their death. One of his disciples, Micah Johnson, committed the acts. I filed lawsuits on behalf of Demetric Penny. A Clinton-appointed judge and a Trump-appointed judge threw them out. I think they were afraid that they were going to be harmed. And this is what we're dealing with today. And the police are left defenseless. So we have this new organization called America's Sheriff, America's toughest sheriff, Joe Arpaio, and America's toughest lawyer, yours truly. You can see it at americassheriff.org. That's 2 S's in the middle, americassheriff.org. We need your support. And here's what we're doing. We not only have lawsuits in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where a case actually I brought under a different entity, but it's going to be transferred to that to handle it, is that police there were fired simply by social media postings that they were not even shown The district attorney there, Larry Krasner, he was elected with the money of George Soros, a self-hating Jew who confiscated the property, along with his father, of Jews going to ovens and gas chambers in World War II. And the mayor, Jim Kenney, a total leftist political hack, and the then police commissioner, Richard Ross, who later had to leave over allegations of sexual harassment. We sued them all. And this is just the beginning. We need to stand up for our police. These police are important, and they're particularly important because crime in the African-American community per capita is much higher than white crime, higher than crime from other sectors of society. That's a reality. Nobody wants to talk about that. That's why you have more shootings, because per individual, it's higher. Now, that being said, the major crime that's being committed is against African Americans by African Americans themselves. Okay, and most African Americans are good people, but these are people that grew up in an environment, and it's like the Wild West. But we saw it recently with a cop that saved the life of a young African American woman that was about ready to get stabbed by another African American young girl. So this is what we need to do. And we need to fight back peacefully and legally. America's sheriff is playing that role. Another role that is being played, as I said, is our citizens' grand juries, indicting Biden and his son and his brother for massive bribery. We're going to be moving on. We presented evidence at our last citizens' grand jury against John Kerry for treason in passing classified information to the Iranian regime, this terrorist regime, and it's on tape. The Iranian foreign minister actually admits what Kerry did. Now, what's the response of the Republican Party by and large? Well, Kerry should resign. It's not enough to resign. He needs to be prosecuted and thrown in prison. And therefore, he's our next target. And we're already presenting evidence in that regard with regard to those crimes. We're going to move on to Comey. We're going to move on to everyone who wasn't indicted, even by the Trump Justice Department. But yet, the left is ruthless. They're willing to use the Justice Department. They're willing to use whatever means they have. Local district attorneys, the district attorney in New York, a total political hack. Cyrus Vance, the son of Cyrus Vance, the Secretary of State by the same name in the Carter administration, who so screwed up foreign policy, as we know, is going to indict President Trump within the next few weeks on tax fraud and tax evasion. Undoubtedly trumped up charges, no pun intended, actually pun intended. But this will immobilize President Trump. And what is the moral to this story? Taking out Giuliani, they're going to try to convict him on something and get him disbarred and remove him from public life and any aspect. Now, he didn't do a great job defending the president, but at least he tried. Give him credit. He had some courage. It's a full court press to destroy everybody. And that's why we, the American people, need to use citizens' grand juries. We need a third continental Congress to declare independence from this corrupt and compromised so-called government. We need to move on just like our founding fathers did. And we're going to talk about that later on in this show, particularly during the verdict segment of this case. And it is a case, not just a show. We have to get the job done now before we lose this country. I'll be right back with Armstrong Williams.
And now, 4 words that make corrupt politicians make wee-wee in their little pants.
Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
Be the one who makes our country great again. Go to freedomwatchusa.org and donate.
I'm back with my good friend of many, many years, a very courageous American, an African American. And frankly, the African Americans in this country really are the only people that have courage these days and are speaking out. Armstrong sometimes has me on his show and I speak out, but I'm one of the few that does. And I really admire my African American friends, and Armstrong's at the top of the list. He's lived it. He's lived discrimination. He knows what it's about, but yet he's a rational human being, and he is a true conservative. And also, he's from South Carolina, so he knows a little bit about Tim Scott that gave the response to Joe Biden the other night, which got a lot of accolades. Tell us what your take is, Armstrong. And he's also obviously a very accomplished talk show host and writer and public relations expert. But tell us what your take is with regard to the speech of Joe Biden the other night, particularly coming from South Carolina.
You know, I don't want to disappoint you, my brother, because you're a brother to me. But you know what? I've not experienced the racism and discrimination ever in my life. I cannot, and I say this often when in the books I've written and the speeches I've given, I can't think of any instance where I have felt slighted or denied or made to feel uncomfortable because of my race. You know, it's interesting because I don't think just every American who happens to be black in America has experienced racism, and nor do I believe there are whites who are exempt, or Jews who are exempt from discrimination because they're white and Jewish. So I just wanted to clarify that because I think that is very, very important. You know, listen, Senator Tim Scott is a very dear friend of South Carolina, gave a rebuttal to Biden's speech to Congress. And in it, he rightly pointed out the failed policies of President Biden thus far, which are too many to even number. I mean, they're pointing this, the CDC saying that racism is a public health crisis, and everything is about race. I mean, using the Georgia law to say it was a Jim Crow relic, his involving himself in the George Floyd, Derek Chauvin trial before the verdict came out, going on national TV, he and Maxine Waters. I mean, and to me, the most ridiculous thing, though, was with Tim Scott, which Biden nor the Democratic hypocritical leftist left never denounced, was the reaction to the left calling Tim Scott Uncle Tim, which is a gross reference, Larry, to Uncle Tom. Tim Scott, who happens to be a senator from my state of South Carolina, who just happens to be African-American, pointed out that America is not a racist country, contrary to the claims by the radical left. I was even more shocked when Vice President Kamala Harris was on the Today Show a day later, and she was asked about Senator Scott's statement, and she agreed with him. I was absolutely shocked. And now you have these self-righteous white liberals and a lot of so-called black Americans who think that white people have a monopoly on racism, and they're just as racist and as divisive and as hypocritical as anybody else, are being racist themselves. And Larry, where do they get off? It is nonsense, and it is racist. Moreover, what has happened on this Twitter, it has no place in America. It is time for America to wake up and denounce this woke culture, denounce this cancel culture, denounce this political correctness. And do we want to go down the path of those great nations that fell, or do we want to rise up for a better America for tomorrow? And just because we don't support Biden's policies, just because we do not see racism the way the rest of the country see it, doesn't mean that we're racist. And even Biden declared in his state of address, it's not a State of the Union, that white supremacists is terrorism. I mean, what he was saying is that white people are the new class that you can discriminate against, malign, cancel without any thought. I mean, this is what he's saying. And if that is what America wants to become, you cannot conquer racism by more racism. You cannot conquer bigotry by more bigotry, by becoming more bigoted yourself. But we've got to have faith that Americans want a future that they can be proud of, not the one the left is trying to build. And what they're trying to do is very destructive, Larry. And remember when President Biden, in his speech, proclaimed Buy America, Hire America. And it was decried by the left as racist fear-mongering. I mean, interesting, though, that their race-baited in chief Biden probably boasted the term during his speech to Congress to tout his new jobs plan, But what is it with the double standard? For 4 years, the left spewed this propaganda and race and baited the public into a sick lie that all white people are racist. And even Biden's speech to the Congress, he spoke of this systemic racism that has plagued our nation. But does he not remember that he served directly under President Barack Obama, that his vice president is also an American who happens to be black? And do Americans do not see the progress that we've made while a lot of this is nonsense, what they declare? I believe that all Americans, regardless of their race, Larry, are equal both in the eyes of the land and of God. And all this race baiting, all it does, Larry, is further divide the country and indoctrinate our youth into believing they are not good enough. Well, enough is enough, and let's start realizing our collective destiny as one unified nation, not as some identity, not as some race, and where we all have the same standard. And so, it's a very scary time for us right now in this country. It's just a very scary time. I never thought that I would see a time like this, and Americans should be very concerned because there's a double standard for bigotry, a double standard for racism. And if you were to say the things you would say in public that you say on my show, they would call you racist and a bigot, but you speak truth about the double standard. And that's why my platform is not to cancel you, not to cancel them. Like Alan Dershowitz says, I don't want you to cancel Tim Shriver because he doesn't necessarily support the vaccines, which Twitter did. They just canceled him, just shut him down. He said, I want to participate in a debate where I can hear what he has to say so I can challenge him. Debate is healthy for our country. But, Larry, if I don't like you, you got these self-righteous people like AOC, these self-righteous people like members of Congress. If they don't like what you say, if they don't like what you look, even if they get your business and name wrong, they just want to cancel you. These high priestesses of self-righteousness, this high priest of this sanctimonious that I know what is right and you don't know what is right, and if you don't agree with us, we're just going to cancel you and mute you out. That is a problem, Larry.
Well, and it's going to get further than canceling out. I think people have to fear for their safety these days. And, of course, Biden wants to get rid of Second Amendment rights by and large. He's just starting that process right now. But how do you explain, Armstrong? I mean, I know how I explain it, but I want to get the listeners to listen to you. And this is why I love you, because you are courageous and you speak the truth. How do you explain that you have virtually every aspect, large portions of the American body politic, whether it's sports leagues, whether it's corporations like Coca-Cola and Delta, whether it's labor unions, whether it's bar associations, you name it. They're throwing their lot behind Biden and Harris and these leftists. And it reminds me of what happened in the days leading up to the Third Reich, when companies like BMW, Mercedes, Deutsche Bank, which financed the concentration camps in Nazi Germany, threw their lot behind Hitler and kept him in power until, by the grace of God, we won and we liberated not just Germans, but the rest of the world from this scourge. So what really scares me, and I think you alluded to it, is that there are large portions of American society who aren't necessarily even political that have thrown their lot behind this radical push to socialism and borderline communism and total control, total leftist takeover of this country, while at the same time the Republican Party's on its back and on life support.
I mean, let's just look at what the MLB did in Georgia. No regard for the facts. And even the Washington Post gave Stacey Abrams and people calling this Jim Crow era relic racism, gave them 4 Pinocchios. Even the New York Times, in an article that was written by one of their top reporters, said there was no truth to it. I mean, and then you have these corporations. All they want to do is be politically correct. They have no backbone. They have no courage to speak out and take a stand. They're willing, at the first hint of racism, they're willing to fire their employees. They're willing to cancel the sporting events without even examining the facts. They're cowards. And you ask yourself who make these decisions, and you take someone like LeBron James, who took to Twitter and posted a picture of a Columbus police officer who killed Ma'Khia Bryant after she attacked another woman with a knife, and he posted a photo of the caption, "You're next." If that had been a conservative athlete like Tim Tebow, somebody like Drew Brees. You remember how they wanted to cancel Drew Brees when he showed some kind of support for some policy that Trump had? They wanted to cancel him out. And Nike is not willing to take a stand, and they're hypocrites about what they allow China to do, but yet they can be so self-righteous with what's going on with culture and racism and bigotry in America. The facts, it doesn't even make any sense anymore. I mean, you ask yourself, where are the stance? Where are they drawing? What is the consistent?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense. They want something in return. Here, the big tech's got something in return. The sports leagues get something in return. In effect, they're throwing their lot with Biden and Harris because they think they'll get something back that will make them more profitable, more successful, and that kind of thing. And that's exactly what happened with Hitler, with these industrialists that propped him up. Is that not everybody that supported Hitler was a Nazi, but yeah, he was in charge. So they go with the winner, and the Republican Party looks like it's basically a dead party at this point. So they're going with who they think's in control. That's my take.
You know, I have been trying to keep track of the amount of times that President Biden has succumbed to pressure from the far left on policy issues or nominations or woke culture. And you have to ask yourself, is he a president? Is he a follower or a leader? I mean, because Biden, or any other president for that matter, Larry, should be elected based on their ability to make sound decisions and stick to them, no matter what the left or the right say. That is a requirement for a leader of any organization, especially our country. And it seems like a weekly occurrence that Biden says or does something and is forced to backtrack after the loudest voices on the far left rant and rave against it. And so sometimes he gets it right, like he was taking the right position on immigration and other issues. But the rant, he's so fearful of it, he backs down, as if AOC is running the Democratic Party now. You ask yourself, where is the leadership?
Well, there is no leadership. You mentioned Drew Brees before. You know, he came out strong at first and he backed down because they backed these people into a corner. And that's exactly what we're dealing with right here. So look at what happened to Rudy Giuliani the other day. I mean, they want to destroy all potential opposition. Bar associations, you testified on my behalf in a proceeding. They don't like Larry Klayman because I'll hold their feet to the fire. They don't like Bill Barr. All former presidents of the D.C. Bar filed a complaint against him. Kellyanne Conway, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, and Giuliani. And it's every aspect of society that is trying to eliminate any opposition to this ultra-leftist push.
And look at what Project Veritas founder James O'Keefe, who's the latest victim of Twitter's policy of censoring voices who expose the malpractice of the media in the far left. I mean, he published an undercover report where a number of CNN employees stated that the network's entire intention in the aftermath of the 2016 election was to undermine President Trump and thwart any efforts to have him reelected in 2020. And then so instead of dealing with the facts, it was obvious to any objective viewer, but hearing it come directly from workers at CNN is astonishing and should be criminal. And a news network does not have the job of changing political outcomes. Their job is to report the news. And Twitter officially stated that the reason O'Keefe's account was banned was because he was operating fake accounts, and we are supposed to believe that.
No, we have the leftist media and even some of the conservative, so-called conservative side have basically become the political hacks. That's true. We got 30 seconds, Armstrong. Where can people go to listen to your shows? Because they need to listen to Armstrong Williams. It's very important that you teach them where we need to go here.
That we teach each other. It's at A Right Side, at ARIGHTSIDE, and you can go to my website, armstrongwilliams.com. It tells you where all our shows are live and streaming and our written content as well.
And I'm privileged to be on your show from time to time. Thank you, my brother.
You take care now.
Before he was a trial lawyer, he sliced him and diced him.
People used to ask me, Larry, what caused you to start Judicial Watch and now Freedom Watch, given the powerful forces in this country that put you at risk?
In a meat packing plant.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
A very special prosecutor, Larry Klayman.
Now the verdict, fellow patriots, those who aren't sunshine soldiers and summer patriots, those, in the words of Thomas Paine, are willing to risk all to save this country. And speaking of Thomas Paine, because conservative websites now are afraid and running for the exits and censoring what other conservatives say and do, I've started a new subsection of Freedom Watch called the New Common Sense. So you can find it at freedomwatchusa.org. And I solicit and I welcome columns by conservatives. We'll, of course, decide whether to publish them or not. We have to exercise that editorial control, but we're not going to censor people that aren't saying things that are destructive of trying to recreate the vision of our founding fathers and their creation, which has already been destroyed by Biden and Harris in the first 100 days. It's called the New Common Sense, because conservative websites, and for that matter, cable, a lot of them speak out of both sides of their mouth. Not One America News, but let's take Newsmax, for instance. I used to write a blog for Newsmax. I would say maybe only about 1 in every 10 columns could I ever get published, because Chris Ruddy is not really a conservative. He runs that. He started it. He gave $1 million to the Clinton Foundation when he thought Hillary Clinton was going to be elected president. He's an opportunist. He sees an opening now with regard to Fox News, which has gone left. But yet they will censor. And they will, in fact, just a few weeks ago, they threw Mike Lindell off the channel, okay, when he talked about election fraud. A little better than Jimmy Kimmel, who interviewed Mike Lindell and was very disrespectful to him and arrogant. At one time, Kimmel was funny. He's not funny anymore. In fact, he's frankly disgusting. But that being said, is that we need to get the truth out to the American people. We need to enforce our citizens' grand juries. We will indict, we will try, we will convict, and we will seek to mete out the sentences peacefully and legally. We have the right of citizens' arrest. We're not going to use force. But with the American people rising up, if we can get them to rise up, and that's the purpose for the New Common Sense. It was the printing press. It was pamphlets in colonial days that coalesced the colonies. We need to educate. And then we need a third continental Congress. We need to declare independence from the criminals in Washington. We need an electoral system not based on fraud, but based on actual voting to really elect representatives. You know, the motto during the First Revolutionary War was no taxation without representation. That was one of them. Look at what's happening now. The Republican Party is being rolled. There's no Republican Party left. It doesn't exist. Look at their reaction to Biden the other night, sitting on their hands, not knowing what to say. They wheel out Tim Scott. You know, Tim Scott's not the be all and end all. I mean, he's a nice guy and he says the right things, but that's not going to be the Messiah, nor will the governor of Florida be the Messiah, DeSantis. We need to rise up ourselves and we need to declare a new nation. Make it clear that government officials and federal judges don't have immunity. They gave it to themselves. Make it clear that we should have a clause in the Constitution that allows for lawsuits for discrimination on the basis of political ideology and belief, so we're not canceled out and discriminated against by big tech. There are a lot of things to do that we can do peacefully and legally without resorting to violence. But you know what? We have to be prepared for violence because we're not going to be the one that starts it, but we have a Second Amendment right. And Biden and Harris are on the move to take that away from us too, the left. All dictatorships have removed the right of self-defense through guns. And that's why. So did King George III. He tried to take them away after everything broke up, after violence broke up at Lexington and Concord when the colonies were pushing back. So we need to protect that as well. Militias aren't a dirty word. They're in the Second Amendment. They were put in there by founding fathers exactly for situations like this, where the American people are being enslaved by a radical leftist Marxist ideology. And in our own groups, like Armstrong Williams, who you've heard, we need to speak out against the despots in our own groups. Armstrong speaks out about the radical blacks who are attempting to destroy this country. I speak out about the radical leftist Marxian Jews that are also trying to destroy this country and Israel. Same for the radical Muslims, same for the feminists, same for the atheists. We have to ourselves rise up. The American people, there's no political messiah. So go to freedomwatchusa.org, read my book, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry, and let's save this country. Not with words, not like Larry Elder says, but with actual actions. Thank you for listening to me. I'll be back next week. Remember that the Father and the Son will only help those that help themselves. And you stay safe.
Hey, we get it. You don't want to be hearing a Progressive commercial right now, so let us tell you something you do want to hear. You are powerful. You're a warrior who bathes in your enemy's tears. Then you step out of that refreshing tear bath and into a bathrobe that somehow looks good on you. Yeah, you can pull off a robe. There. Don't you feel better? You'll also feel better when you save money for driving safely with Snapshot from Progressive. Savings you can use to buy more robes. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Snapshot not available in California, North Carolina, or from all agents. California, North Carolina, or from all agents. California, North Carolina.